Will the ACC survive? I can't answer that question. Will the ACC look much different 5 years from now than it does today? I can't answer that question, but I think we've got our indication in court, both in North and South Carolina and Florida, with the ACC waging war on two fronts against Florida State and Clemson, who, of course, have taken up to the legal side to fight their way out of the conference. North Carolina, of course, in recent months has been very vocal in the media as well. Do these brands that you see on the screen, how do they look in comparison to one another, comparison to the conference? What kind of value do they bring, both in regards to football, athletics, brand, prestige, culture, all of those things put together, in academics as well, in their quest to move on and be a more valuable brand on the college football landscape, and an ever-changing college football landscape. We appreciate you all being here at the Voice of College Football. You may be watching on the Florida State channel, the Clemson channel, the Miami channel. Welcome. We got our guy, Tony Altimore, here, consultant and strategist, here to break down the data. And this guy is a wealth of knowledge, both currently and historically, about the dynamics of these conferences and the institutions themselves. Tony, it's great to see you. Thanks so much.
Great to be back.
Absolutely.
Well, we've got a lot of interesting stuff we think for you guys that'll help. For those of you guys who haven't been on a deep dive show with us before, what we do here is we take a look at the schools that are within Mark's Voice of College Football community, and we've added 3 extra ones. And what we do then is we try to compare the schools across just sort of that set of metrics. So, when we're taking a look tonight at Florida State, Miami, Clemson, and North Carolina, we're not just looking at them across the whole ACC or the whole of FBS. We're looking at them just really from this perspective of the blue bloods, the schools that are part of Mark's community. And I think it gives us an interesting perspective. And it's something you don't really see very often, because usually when you see these schools compared and stuff, it's just against each other. But as we think about potential realignment issues, what's going to happen in the future, nobody knows. I think it's interesting to really see where do they stack up against the schools that really drive value in the other conferences.
Absolutely. And again, these are 4 schools that have so much value on all the fronts that we just mentioned. And I'm interested to see how this looks graphically and in regards to the metrics of these 4 in particular.
All right. So we're going to take a look here at a number of different factors, both in terms of the university and the athletic department. The reason we do this is because to really understand the athletic department and the finances and really what's behind it, we need to understand the school too. It'll help you appreciate kind of what's going on in the bigger picture as well. So let's start off. What do the fans know? Well, the fans know the Wikipedia composite score is actually and we'll come back to this when we get to the football section towards the end. But when this Wikipedia score, we've done some statistical analysis, actually is really significant. And fans know Florida State and Clemson are great programs. Miami historically was a great program. It's fallen off a little bit. And Carolina a little further down. You think about national championships, Miami's got their 5, Florida State's got their 3 Heismans. North Carolina doesn't have any. And we talk a lot about TV viewers. We know people watch Clemson, they watch Florida State. But we know about attendance too. We'll skip that. We'll come back to all that. But what we want to talk about tonight also is about the schools themselves and kind of how they fit together. And one of the interesting things we see is when we look at Mark's Voice of College Football community, who he has channels for, these are all exceptional schools. You guys will hear people, fans joke back and forth like, oh, your school's terrible, whatever. There are no bad schools at all in the power conferences. There are none. But when you take a look at these here right now, for example, the highest level that you can get from the Carnegie classifications for a research school is called R1. Every single school in here is one of those. About more than half these are AAU schools. A lot of them are state flagship schools. A ton of them are land-grant schools. And under the U.S. News classifications, they're all national universities. So these are all exceptional schools. So when you see somebody at the end of this or the bottom end of this, it doesn't mean they're not good, because they're all exceptional. It's just comparing those exceptional schools to each other. All right. So let's look, first of all, just school ranks, because some of you guys may not be updated on this. So when we look at this, again, all good schools. These are the thing about the ACC. The ACC's overall academics are exceptional. If you take a look at that, you see that here. Carolina's number 22 in the country. Florida State, 53. Miami, 67. Clemson, 86. That's great. If you branch it out, because people, I don't like U.S. news. Well, the one that academics like more is the Shanghai rankings for the ARWU one. Again, it looks pretty much the same. Grad school, skip over grad schools. Let's talk about attendance. Like, getting into these schools is an interesting thing. Again, because all of this ends up more than you think feeding into the athletics. So Florida State, a lot of people don't realize, has really in the last 30 years transformed itself into being a fantastic school. Among these teams, Florida State has the 4th highest applicants. They're between Michigan and USC. And that's amazing. Miami's a small private school, so they are a little on the lower end. But, all these are really, really popular schools. And they're really hard to get into, generally. Carolina only takes 17% of the applicants. Clemson's the lowest at 43. Look, a lot of these schools, all of these very good schools are in the 70s and 80s. And if you look at yield rate, which is like how many of the kids you let in choose to come, also really high. And you just sort of see North Carolina is a wildly good school, even if their football team's not always as good. And look at Florida. Now, as far as market power, school strength. So this sort of shows like where's your yield rate versus your admissions rate. And you want to be in the upper right. These schools are all in really, really exceptional positions. So ACC, good on you. Just a fun little thing, taking a look at where national leaders, congressmen, senators all come from. Carolina's at the top. So they're really churning out great graduates and leaders of the country. As far as enrollment goes, now this is one of the interesting things that starts to feed into something that really affects football, and that is scale. So the bigger the school is, usually the more money they have, the more ability they have to fund football, the more ability they have to, provide facilities, fund what they need, pay for the coaches, and it all sort of snowballs into success. So the more scale you have, the better. So when we take a look at these schools, it helps to be big. And Florida State, for example, it helps to be big and rich, or at least be one of the two. Florida State, one of the bigger ones here, 44,000. Carolina's 32, Clemson 28, Miami's only 19,000. Now, you guys have probably heard about the enrollment cliff that's coming. Colleges have been shrinking, and they're about to shrink a lot more. Now, take a look here at the growth. And this is graduate students going up and undergraduate students going over. And you sort of start to see, first of all, most of these types of schools are still growing, even as the population of student-age people are shrinking. And look at Clemson. Look at Miami. Look at Miami. Miami's a small school, but it's growing a lot. Florida State's growing a lot. Carolina's growing. So they're really moving along. It's pretty impressive. They don't have very many online students. You don't see this. You don't see very many online students in these schools, but Florida State's the most, and it's only 4.7. Let's talk about research money. Now, why research money matters is, like we said, in a world where resources are really mattering, you want to be big and rich. And what research funding does is it helps make you both. Because the big research schools get huge grants, and they get a huge chunk of that grant that actually goes sort of as overhead to the school. So if you're a school, the more research you have, the more resources your school has, the more resources are there for athletics generally. And you see Carolina is one of the biggest there. Carolina's rolling in at $1.3 billion. Miami, $439 million. Florida State, $356 and rising fast. I think they said it's over $400 for the next year. Clemson a little smaller, $263. So all of these institutions are big research schools. But again, you see that helps give you resources that you need. Carolina, we're going to see in a minute how much their athletic department competes in Olympic sports. It's the broader reaches of the school that help fund that. So this is total budget of the whole school. And you see, interestingly, Miami is the most at $4.4 billion. Why? Because they have a huge healthcare system. One of the things that really, really helps schools and helps schools be rich, therefore helps athletic departments be rich, is having a healthcare system. And you see, interestingly, who's the number one on here? Again, just because you have the money doesn't mean you spend it on athletics, which is a really interesting question, because Miami here at number one, they're at number one in this group, but their chancellor or their president just left Miami today to be the new chancellor at UCLA. It's huge news. So he is really invested in athletics at Miami. I mean, brought in Mario. They're building new facility. They're building a whole new on-campus facility. They tried to build a new stadium. So as he goes to UCLA, that'll be really interesting. But you see here, Miami's sort of the most here. But one of the things you'll notice, like Florida State and Clemson are a little smaller, and stuff like that really starts to show us, why does it really matter to them so much that they're falling behind the Big Ten and the SEC? Well, they're not, Michigan or Penn State or Washington with a ton of money. So that extra, $20-30 million really starts to matter. This takes a look at government funding. How much of your money comes from the government? Carolina and Florida State get a lot, relative to the peer institutions. Clemson and, of course, Miami gets only a shred. This is another interesting metric: reliance on tuition. Schools that rely on tuition for a lot of their money, they tend to be, it's almost like sort of like the school version of living paycheck to paycheck. And you see, again, Carolina's at the top, Clemson's at the bottom. So it's fine getting by and living on tuition, but then you're very, very sensitive to when, like, for example, in the next couple of years, when the number of students is going down. Endowment, I don't know why there's a giant check mark on that. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys. Endowment value. That was weird. Endowment's like a savings. A lot of people don't know what an endowment is. It's sort of like a trust fund or like a savings account for the school where they only live off the interest. They only live off a portion of the interest. And the more money the school has in their endowment, the more money sort of they have for themselves to do things they want and all that. Stanford's a great example. Stanford is like a $40 billion endowment. So having that kind of money lets them do what they want. So when we look here, we see, Carolina's got a big endowment at $5.4 billion. Florida State and Clemson don't have as much. That's why you hear them looking for more solutions to really sort of fund their athletic department, because they're not sitting on those riches. And really none of those other three schools are. But Carolina's doing pretty well. Now, this is an interesting piece. Again, you sort of see this here with Carolina. So, like, for example, we talked about Stanford. Last year, Stanford wrote a $38 million check from their endowment to help pay for their athletics. That can cover a whole lot of gap when you have a savings account that essentially writes you a $38 million check last year. So how much of the endowment is for athletics? And the schools have to disclose this, the public ones. And we see Carolina's got $500 million sort of, banked towards supporting athletics. Florida State, when they filed their report, only 83, Clemson only 200K. So, Clemson isn't really doing an athletic endowment. But, again, you see not a lot of these schools don't have a lot, but just, Carolina alone using that wealth to really sort of build themselves a base. Fundraising is another question. So this data is actually a couple years old because they don't have the new stuff, but the ability of the school to fundraise translates into the ability of the school to, pay for the things that they want to pay for outside of the school itself. And you see here, Carolina and Miami fundraise a lot. Clemson and Florida State don't. So again, this is FY16 to FY20 averages, but you just sort of see there that fundraising really starts to matter to funding what the schools want. Market, and this is not as much of an issue in realignment right now, but I thought we'd look at it just really closely. Just local area population versus state population. They kind of go together a little bit, but you sort of see, Florida State's in a really small town, but it's a huge state. Miami, sort of the opposite, or opposite end of the same state. Carolina and Clemson, just sort of how they compare to local area and state versus everybody else. So this is interesting. Let's look here. This is state market size versus college football focus. So I just looked at Google Trends, not the best piece of info, but what's the football interest level by state? And then, what's the population of the state? So as we look at here, we see, there's nobody in the upper right, which is where you want to be, I guess, which is where, Brazilian soccer is, of, crazy fans and huge population. We have no states like that. The biggest, apparently where football is, the top is Alabama, Where it's the lowest of these states, because there's a lot of states that are lower, but they don't have major football teams. Blues, California. But when you have about 40 million people, you don't have to have them all be fans.
So the state market size isn't obvious. The football interest is just taken from polls and surveys.
No, it's from Google Trends, so it rates them from 0 to 100.
Okay.
It's not really a percentage or anything, but it just sort of gives us a sense of, for example, Clemson is in a smaller state, but they're much more college football obsessed.
How many people that live in those states are doing Google searches for college football?
Relative to the other states, yeah.
Yes.
So, but you see Florida right there in a pretty good position as well, with the 3 Florida schools sort of clustered around the little dot. All right, let's look at the athletic department, because I know you guys didn't want to spend too much time talking about school stuff. So this is number of sports, and there's going to be a lot of angry things in the comments. This is their official number of sports that they file with the Department of Education. Whether they consider like outdoor track different from outdoor cross country, and whether the diving team is separate from the swimming team. Those are all like semantics that the school makes, but this is the official number of sports that they tell the Department of Education. And you see one of the issues with Carolina is they're really big on those Olympic sports. So they're running about 24. Again, swimming, diving, track, how many do you call those different teams? It can vary. Miami's the smallest. Miami has a really small Olympic sports program. So they've only got 15. And again, this is compared to these other sort of big blue bloods here. See, Clemson's at 16, Florida State's at 18. Let's look at the athletic department. So we just did that. National championships. So how have they done in championships? Look at Carolina. Carolina is at the top of this group. They've got 50 national championships. And they've had, and again, this is through FY23 because this year's data has not been released yet. So sorry, they just won, another one in soccer. It's not in here. Carolina's got 50 and they've got 65 individual athletes. So those are like, swimmers and track and stuff like that. Florida State 17, Miami 16, Clemson 7. You see, these schools have done really well. North Carolina exceptionally well, but they're not quite to the level where you start to see the Texas and the Penn State and USC and UCLA. The Director's Cup. So this is the measure of your entire athletic department, sort of how it compares. And this is where you win the trophy every year. The Texas just won for this year. It was announced yesterday. Go Longhorns! Congratulations and hook 'em. So this is the last 5 non-COVID years versus just last year. And if you see, Carolina, that huge Olympic sports program, they're up in rarefied air, just above Georgia. Florida State's not far behind them. The thing about Florida State, they don't have a ton of sports, but they focus on winning. So whether that's soccer, whether that's baseball, whatever, Florida State does what they want to win, and they do. So you see, Florida State's really, really successful as well. It's kind of interesting and surprising to me that Miami and Clemson are so far down. I know Miami baseball's not been doing very well and stuff like that lately either, but they're not particularly high. Number of athletes. Some of this relates to the size of your school, and some of it relates to how many teams you have and what teams you have. So these numbers kind of vary a little bit. But this is trying to take a look at about how many varsity athletes do you have. And one of the interesting things with the House settlement is going to be a huge increase in the number of scholarship athletes. So the bottom, and this data is not released. So this is some very approximate calculations that may not be exact because it's impossible to do that without the actual data. But this sort of tries to back into about how many scholarship athletes they have, because they're probably going to have to add a couple hundred more in a lot of these cases. And again, you see Carolina is at the top end, above Notre Dame and UCLA even. And then the others are kind of towards the bottom. Let's look at the athletic budget. So athletic budget is kind of interesting. Again, none of these schools are that high. And so this is looking at their budget, the revenue that they generate, unsubsidized from the school, and sort of the operating margins, the difference between those. Now, this data, by the way, guys, depending on your source, will vary a lot because whether or not it includes things like debt payments, interest, capital expenditures, stuff like that, will vary. So what I've tried to do here is give you guys the best stuff, which I think is from Sportico. For the schools that do not report to Sportico, I added in the stuff that they had to file from the government. So this is actually breaking the data rules and combining two sources, but I wanted you guys to have everybody on one chart. But of course, the private schools, we don't get some of the data from, but you can see kind of here where everybody is and how their budgets compare. And so you sort of start to see Florida State's talking about a budget gap. Well, look at their budget gap. Florida State Athletic Department right now is spending $172 million a year. Ohio State's spending $100 million more and making a profit. In Carolina, that huge athletic department, they're only spending $139. So that's kind of surprising. I mean, North Carolina, like when I do those bang for the buck charts, like how many dollars you spent per director's cut point, Carolina is going to have to be up there. So this is a really interesting chart. Again, you sort of see, how much does that athletic department lose just off their operating margin? Now, there is some sketchy stuff. It has, because again, remember guys, athletic departments, they're not businesses, so they're not trying to make a profit. So it's not like if they wanted to, could they? It's, they plan and run the business usually to break even. Let's talk about the subsidy, burning money. Subsidy is really interesting because this is how much money the school is covering for the athletic department. How much money the school is giving the athletic department. So this doesn't include debt, if they're not paying it back or whatever. This is just the money the school gives to the athletic department. And a lot of schools view this not as a bad thing. So like, you want to look at it interestingly. It's okay to have some, but you don't want to have too much. Because, the subsidy, a lot of times like students, if they get a subsidy, then they'll get like free admission or whatever. But at Ohio State, there's no subsidy, so they have to buy for tickets. And you see all three of these are on a subsidy. They're really not too high. It's once you get into G5, you start to see subsidies of like, 15 million, 20 million, 40 million. Mm-hmm. So for Carolina, for example, Carolina, like I said, they have all those Olympic sports and everything. So for them to only be at 14 isn't too bad. None of these schools really have subsidies. But again, you see, the ones at the end, they don't need it. They're even turning money back. So this is athletic profits returned to the schools. None of these teams had money to give back. But a lot of the others, again, they had excess budget and transferred it back to the school at the end of the year. So athletic debt is a big subject. And it's a big subject right now that's a debate sort of with this private equity stuff. Because debt is not necessarily a bad thing for college, and particularly for college athletics. Because the difference between college and a regular person is that colleges can borrow money really cheap. Colleges can borrow money cheaper than private equity can borrow. So, it's easy for colleges to get money when they need it through debt and, pay it back over time. So things like facilities, stadium renovations, things like that, it makes sense to pay for with debt because it's cheap, it's easy to get, and, it's something like, rebuilding your stadium, you're going to pay off over time. The only thing is you have to actually pay it off. The problem with Georgia Tech is that for whatever reason, the money they spent for to do a huge renovation, like, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, they didn't really pay down. And so now they're faced with, they kind of need to do another one in the, somewhat near future, and they still have all the debt from the other one. So, their AD's done some really interesting things to try to help start paying that down. But it is something to sort of keep an eye on here because the schools don't want to rack it up too high. And you see, Florida State right now is a 127. I think they just added like 300 million to that this year or something for their stadium renovation. Carolina's way down there. Clemson's kind of in the middle. So as long as you can afford it, it's fine. But you don't want to be saddled with a lot of debt for stuff that you don't need. So on the revenue end, I don't want to dwell on this. This is sort of conference revenue. This is changing dramatically this year and next year. And a lot of the revenue stuff's sort of being thrown up. You can kind of tear up the history books as we get record amounts of new revenue. But this is interesting. Look, this is game day revenue. So tickets, programs, concessions, parking, all that, which, by the way, is a lot less than you'd think it would be as far as how much the athletic department actually gets. A lot of times that money, goes to the school and it goes to like the parking department, not to the athletic department. And then this is athletic department donor giving. And this is, again, FY23 here. And you see, none of these schools are making nearly as much money as their peer, as the bigger peers are. Carolina, I think, is really high because of basketball, because they have Dean Dome. You'll see their basketball numbers in a minute. I was surprised Florida State is so low. I don't know if tickets are really cheap or what's going on there. Florida State has pretty good donations. Remember, we saw Florida State in the 2010s, and Florida State's doing a lot better fundraising now. But in the 2010s, they were averaging $83 million a year, and right now, last year they got $54 million for football alone, and that was when they were not good. This is before Norvell really got them going. This is the 22 season. So you sort of see they need to close that gap to the Big Ten schools, because this is what's helping pay for Ohio State to have a $275 million budget. So let's look at spending. Where do they spend it? First of all, let's look at coaches. Again, we don't have the data for Miami. This is how much they spend on football coaches, the rest of their men's coaches, and their women's coaches. It is not very balanced, as I'm sure you can imagine. But and I don't know what Virginia Tech was doing. They didn't report it for whatever reason. But you see again, they're not on the high end. Now, this is, of course, Norvell, I think, just signed a huge new extension. So this is, again, also a number we could probably tear up. This I thought was interesting. This is, how much of the money that they allocate to their different sports is spent on football and men's basketball versus all the other teams combined. Interestingly, Miami, because remember, smaller athletic department, 61% of the money from there that they allocate towards the different sports is going to football. Only 28% goes to all the other teams that aren't football and basketball. Look at Carolina, look down there, they're, way on the other end, and they're only 46% on football. And then this has to do with there's a whole thing with overhead. We won't get into it. Buy games, this is how much you got paid for it to be a buy game for an away game or an away team versus how much you paid. And it's kind of interesting to see. So Ohio State was the worst. They paid opponents $10 million throughout the year. Interestingly, Carolina is the lowest in this whole group of what they pay for buy games. Recruiting, Miami is one of the highest spenders. Florida State, surprisingly, is one of the lower spenders. Maybe there's just, I don't know, not a lot to do in Tallahassee. I'm surprised they're so low. Sports spending. So how much are they spending on their key sports? Let's look at football first. The reason these are in two sections, guys, is what I did is I went and allocated the overhead that they weren't allocating to the sports, and we allocated it on a per athlete basis across the department. Sort of, the best sort of peanut butter way to do it. Just because there's a whole lot of spending that we needed to account for that wasn't actually on their spending reports. So we try to sort of recreate the real spending there for you guys to be able to see. And you'll sort of see those numbers here on these charts. But, Florida State here spent some of the highest on football of anybody here. Third most behind Alabama and USC, which I thought was surprising. Miami right behind him. I think this had to do with paying Mario and paying the other guy in the same year or whatever over that same period. Clemson kind of in the middle. Carolina at the bottom. Men's basketball. Florida State was high. Miami also quite high. I was surprised Carolina was low. I think their coach probably needs a raise. And Clemson really low. Baseball, Florida State, world-class program towards the top. Again, Carolina towards the bottom, Miami and Clemson in the middle. Women's basketball, of course, Miami had their huge success with the Twins and everything. Carolina, Florida State, Clemson not spending a lot of women's basketball. Volleyball, same thing with Miami, Carolina again at the bottom. All right, let's look at football because I know that's what you guys want to see. So football today. So let's look at current success versus medium-term success. And we're using here SP Plus because it's a good way for us to sort of compare all the different schools. And no surprise, Florida State was great this year. Clemson was pretty good. Miami was pretty good. Carolina was okay. Not quite what they hoped for. But let's see them over the medium term. So the medium term for here is 2002 to 23 because that's what our data set gives us. We see Clemson was number 10. Florida State number 12, even with their down years. Miami number 16, even with their down years. Carolina 44. So how does that trend? So this is the difference from average. So if we take all their different SP pluses over those years from 2002 to 2023, how was 2023 different? Well, of course, Florida State's always pretty good. Carolina is always fairly middling, but they were both better than usual. And then Miami and Clemson were actually both down pretty far this year. Again, Clemson, because they've been so high, but interesting to see Miami down as well. And then we talked about this a little bit at the beginning. Again, whenever I've done like statistical stuff and whenever the Winsipedia composite rankings come into play, it always, like, the statistical programs always tell me it's really significant and a really good indicator, because what that's doing is taking all kinds of different factors and combining them together. And we see, Florida State, despite the fact that they didn't really get good at football until the 80s, is exceptional. They're number 13 on that score. Clemson's 14, Miami's 19, and again, Carolina's down in the 40s. Legacy and brand, national championships. We looked at this. Miami, Florida State, Clemson, both really good. Heisman's national champions. Clemson doesn't have a Heisman. Carolina doesn't have either. Don't worry, Carolina. We have some love coming for you in just a minute. Conference championships and all-time winning percentage. Florida State's got a really good all-time winning percentage. It's better than Georgia and LSU. Miami and Clemson, both pretty good. Carolina, again, a little further down. AP polls. There's something really interesting in this one. Check out the weeks at number 1. So on the left here is your all-time weeks ranked in the AP poll. How many weeks were you ranked? And on the right is how many of those were you ranked at number 1? Check out, Florida State, again, they're pretty far down as far as overall goes. But look at how they are in terms of number 1. They're almost at the top. Same with Miami. So you sort of see Florida State and Miami have had some ups and downs, but their ups have been as high as it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Consensus All-Americans. Again, Florida State have 45 of those, despite really only coming to be themselves in the 80s, is exceptional. Carolina only having 15, despite having been the flagship school of Carolina for its entirety, is not as comparable with the rest of these peers. NFL draft picks, same thing. Miami, way higher than in terms of first round. This is all-time picks versus first round picks. You see Miami and Florida State disproportionate with the first round picks. What about TV? So this is average game viewership. So here we're looking at OTA network broadcasts versus main ESPN. So this is like, what are your networks versus on ESPN? You see Florida State, and again, and this is from 2016 to 23. So Florida State was bad during most of this time, and people still watch them. People watch Florida State. Clemson was outstanding during this time, but had great viewership, but not exceptional. Pretty similar to Miami, and Miami has been through 2 or 3 coaches in this period of time, and then Carolina's a lot farther down. But one of the things you'll notice here, guys, and this has to do with the Big Ten contract and sort of the bigger money involved in all this, is how many more people watch the networks versus ESPN. A lot of people think it's pretty equal. And again, like a random LSU Tennessee game on a Saturday night will draw a lot of viewers. But just in general, the networks typically blow away ESPN. So this is total TV viewers for the regular season. Again, Clemson was exceptional in this period, and Florida State was pretty bad. And you see Florida State and Clemson are right next to each other. And then this is number of games picked up. And I think this is a really important metric because this is the networks choosing how often your game was important enough for them to put on the main channels. And Clemson probably should be higher, but of course they're high because they won all those games under Dabo. Florida State was not very good in this time, and they still pulled really solidly. People watch Florida State. And so the left here is the networks, and the right here is the networks with ESPN. But you see, none of them are close to where Notre Dame's sort of in their own category, but to Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma, Penn State, USC, Alabama. Average game viewership, how many people are watching again, sort of the same thing. Look, Florida State was not good in this time, and they beat Clemson, who was really good in terms of average viewers. Like this one was very telling to me. And then postseason viewership. Of course, Clemson was in the playoffs, so they're way up there. Florida State, for how not good they were, is really good. Florida State draws viewership. And Carolina, again, for all this talk about North Carolina, oh, where's North Carolina going to go? I love North Carolina. They're awesome. But they do not add value to a conference in football like these other schools do. It's just something to think about. What about fans? How do you do in your stadium? So again, this is just comparing to this universe that we talked about. Clemson, they sell out every game, but it's a lot less than some of the others. Florida State, their numbers going to go down because they're actually taking some seats out of their. Lots of schools are taking seats out of their stadium and adding better revenue producing seats and suites and all that. But here we see attendance and capacity. Again, this is last year, so Florida State at capacity, Clemson at capacity. I don't know what Miami was like doing with their tickets, if they were dumping them in the ocean or something. But there's no way they sold 77% of their tickets. But all we have is the data they report. I saw a lot of empty seats in Miami.
But we all did, Tony.
We all did, which is why the funniest thing of all is the fact that the two schools that everyone makes fun of for empty seats are Miami and UCLA, and the UCLA chancellor is the former Miami president now, as of today. Attendance trends. So the NCAA gives us attendance data back to 2013. So how are teams trending on attendance? Miami's trending down. Carolina and Clemson are pretty steady, and Florida State is up, which of course makes sense. Florida State's had a great year. Miami had a pretty disappointing year, but it is interesting to sort of see them both at the extreme ends here of the attendance trends going. Basketball fans, same thing, but a very different story. Here is this year. I'm sorry, because the season just ended. This year's season average attendance and arena capacity. Again, Carolina is number one in this whole group. So they might have even, I forget the number, they might have even been number two behind Syracuse, who plays at a dome. Clemson, Miami, and Florida State, they're not really doing basketball. But one of the interesting questions that I would love to see math on, like real math, not like back in the envelope math, but I'd love to see real math on the value. Carolina basketball may have enough value to make up for some of its football because they are so elite at basketball. So many people watch them. It's not like, oh, we're a little bit better at basketball. You sort of hear people like, no, they're just on another plateau. We'll see that in a moment. Again, attendance trends, Carolina and Miami are up. Clemson, Florida State's down, but again, they're not really worried about basketball either of those places. This is basketball national championships and Final Four appearances. And you see, Carolina, second most national championships, most Final Fours. None of the other three have ever won a basketball title. And two of them have been to one Final Four each. Clemson's never been to one. But Carolina is in another stratosphere. And again, you see these football schools, most of them have never won a basketball championship. Of our universe here, it's only UCLA, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon that have ever won one. And I think Oregon's, I don't know, was in the 40s or something. I don't know when it was.
Mm-hmm. I think they won the first one.
Did they? Okay, that may be, because I was like I don't even know when it was. But I actually, it was so long ago, it made me like go double check to make sure I didn't have like an error in the the data feed. And then doing the same thing we did with SP Plus, we're looking at KenPom. Current this year, current versus sort of that medium term of 2002 to now. Look at Carolina's at the top, better than all these schools.
Mm-hmm.
And Clemson, Florida State, Miami. It's funny they're right next to each other over the medium term. And then the trend there, interestingly, Carolina's down a little on the trend because they're so high, that they go up, ups and downs a little bit. Clemson's actually, I guess, had a really good basketball year this year, and Florida State and Miami were both down. And that is as quick as we could get through a whole bunch of wild info about those teams.
Well, our buddy Cam Underwood from State of the U has great timing, because as soon as Tony finished up his presentation, Cam is right here.
What's up?
I'm guessing, Cam, you didn't get a chance to see much of this, but Tony has just hit us over the head with a ton of information. So I guess we'll stick to football, or if Cam has any direction that you would like to go in regards to anything you would like to see, to comment or ask questions on. Tony's pretty much got everything in regards to athletic performance, budgets, football, the same thing, academics, enrollment rates, all of it, endowments, everything.
Nice. Well, yeah, I saw just caught the bitter end there as a, basketball player growing up, seeing the Ken Palm stuff for Miami last year was seeing it on the floor, and also the metrics were tough for sure. I mean, what was that, 13, 16 losses in a row or whatever?
As a USC Trojan alum, I know how you feel.
Hey, and Mark, see, full circle. Who have I always said always has the best fight song in the world? Fight
Even
on. That fight song is pretty awesome, I'm not gonna lie. Exactly. I mean, really, so
we have 3 of them.
You do, but no, the main one.
And just to cut in real quick, Cam says this from a place of knowledge and experience. This is not just a fan saying, hey, I love that fight song, it's awesome. No, we're talking about a musicologist who has won awards, and his choirs have won awards, national awards. So he knows what he's talking about.
That is high praise.
And my director from when I was at the University of Miami actually has either 2 or all 3 degrees from USC, and he ended up going back and being the head director at USC.
That's awesome.
In the vocal music department. So had a long-standing offer if I wanted to take advanced degrees to come out there to Los Angeles, and almost did one time.
You're still there.
Hey, it is still there. So yeah, maybe, but so I trained musician and music teacher and things like that. So yeah, no, I come with knowledge on that point. But in terms of this, so what was, let me ask you, so what was the most eye-opening metric in terms of Miami, whether it was positive or negative, that you saw relative to football?
I think where we saw them, where they did the weeks at number 1 was really telling to me. Oh, wrong one. So this is AP poll. On the left is number of weeks ranked. On the right is number of weeks ranked number 1. Look at Miami and Florida State in how they compare in overall weeks ranked with how they compare in weeks ranked number 1.
Wow. I mean, it's very disproportionate.
That's wild.
That is super crazy to be that far down and have that level of success. But then that also just speaks to the fact of, I've heard people call Miami like a microwave dynasty, it really, it wasn't that, turn the oven on, put the turkey in on Thanksgiving and let's wait 8 hours. It was
rapid.
Dang, it was rapid and continued too, because after that ascension, it wasn't whatever year that was that USF randomly went to number 2 and lost at Rutgers,
2007.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Bang. 2007. I was thinking 6. I didn't want to get it wrong, so I was right in the ballpark. But it wasn't like that where they kind of touched greatness and then
no, they've been great all the time.
We got up there and then hey, we're cruising at 80,000 feet.
Well, see, I know that one of my dad's very good friends was one of their coaches under Denny Erickson. So when growing up, we would go and when I was in middle school, we would go down to Miami to visit my grandma for spring break, and I would go to their practices for spring ball while my dad was scheming offenses with their coaches. So I grew up sort of on the sidelines of Miami spring ball, which was always fun.
Just to put perspective on what you guys are talking about, look at that. Michigan is number 2 all-time in weeks ranked to Ohio State. I have to add that. But number 2 all-time in weeks ranked. But Miami has been ranked number 1 almost twice as many weeks as Michigan. That's the microwave. We're great, or this has only been since 1980, but here we are, and now we're going to
And-
dominate for 20 years.
And what's wild is when you think about the fact that Miami and Florida State are both doing that on this chart.
Yeah.
And it's funny,
And
I
at the
was
same
talking to a
time,
friend of mine, that Miami is the institution and the team that keeps Bobby Bowden out of the conversation of greatest of all time. Because if Miami didn't exist, how many championships would that man and then that team have won? Like, there are many times where we ruin their championship aspirations. Also, I just popped into the chat.
So although so did their kickers.
So, they helped as well. But yeah, to Marcus Williams, I am a Michigan native. I am a native Michigander from Detroit. My uncle went to the University of Michigan. I've seen every single Big Ten school, well, traditional Big Ten school, except for Ohio State at the Big House. I was there the year that precipitated them putting the net behind the game day guys, because the frat guys were throwing marshmallows and banking them off of Reese Davis's face. I played 3-on-3 tournaments in Chrysler Arena. I was there for the 5-5. I have a picture of the Big House there. I've had snowball fights on the 50-yard line of Michigan Stadium up there in Ann Arbor. It is a great place. So I say all that to say that, popping into the chat, I'm 10 toes down from Michigan. I love Maize and Blue. They do not have the best fight song. I just talked about it on our Miami show. The Michigan fight song is literally 6 notes because it's easy and everybody can do it. Michigan State has a better musical actual composition, and so too does the Troy, or USC. Like I said, trust me, literally a lifelong musician and music. Like, I know what I'm talking about. I hear you, and you might like it more. And I'm not saying, hey, whatever, but just on the merits.
You want a fun one? Listen to Washington. It's the only one. I guess it's the only fight song that starts in a minor key.
Oh, wait, y'all's doesn't start in a minor key?
No.
Well, it starts. It's in a major key. It's just the minor chord of it. Okay.
Yeah, Washington is a really good one too. By the way, you'll laugh at this. I was at the Big House when number 3 Michigan played. I was like, I don't know, 5th grade or 6th grade or something. When number 3 Michigan was playing number 1 Florida State, and everybody thought, it was like the game of Keith Jackson, all that. Everybody thought Michigan was going to win, and I will tell you, Bobby Bowden hit that, and that Michigan team was good, and Bobby Bowden hit them like a freight train going through a school bus.
Yeah, I mean, hey, those
it was wild.
Awesome.
It was like
awesome
circa 91.
Yeah. With Desmond.
Yeah.
But that goes to the point of this poll or this graph that you're saying of how long the sustained success of Miami and Florida State at the top, not just being there, but being there, breaking the doors down and staying at the top of the list.
Well, look at this. There's an apostrophe that shouldn't be there, but this is first round picks in the NFL draft versus all time picks. Sorry for there's a typo of an extra apostrophe. There's no apostrophe. My English teacher mother would come for me. But again, you see here, look at Miami and Florida State. They're all time picks, and look at their first round picks, particularly Miami.
Yeah,
I mean that number is what, 5th overall?
Yeah. And the ratio is incredible. And, to people who are that was only that, 2001 team or whatever, Jalen Phillips was a first round pick. Greg Russo was a first round pick. Philip Dorsett was a first round pick. Eric Flowers recently. I mean, even through the run of futility on the field, there's still been these islands of elite players, these instances of elite players popping up and being first round picks from Miami. And they continue to, dominate in the league and get additional contracts and things like that.
Well, I'll show you another one. We have to go sort of way up to it. Sorry, people on the screen. I want to go to total budget because I think this is a really interesting number as well. This is the school's overall budget. Now, Miami is the smallest of all of these schools, by the way.
Oh yeah.
If we go to wherever the students were, they're the smallest school by far. But I want you to see the total budget. Miami has the advantage of this big group. Again, these are the Mark's channel grouping of schools plus a couple others. So these are sort of the elite blue bloods. And you see, even though Miami is a tiny school, it has a huge budget as far as the university goes. A lot of that's healthcare, but that's creating wealth for the university that then gives them the flexibility to, as we go into an era here of, revenue sharing and resource gaps and everything else, Miami's really well positioned because it is a very rich, powerful institution. By the way, sorry to hear about your president today.
Well, I mean, look, onward and upward. Like, I think, he stepped up from Harvard to Miami, crazy to say, but true. And then stepping up from Miami to UCLA as chancellor. So, I mean, hey, good for him. But I mean, even if you just look at it, this kind of tells or puts metrics to like the journey of the Miami fan. And like, I'm an alum, you know what I mean? But like, we have this huge reach, we have this big budget and everything. And like, I think that, your alma mater and mine, like Miami and USC are like mirror options of each other, like,
very similar institutions,
very similar elite private schools in these cities, they're, like, and if you look,
want
to win, there's a little bit of a gap between like your revenue and ours, but like in that same kind of area, 17 or like, sorry, that's 6.1. So 1.7 billion, like, is a lot. Like, I'm not going to say, I mean, like, hey, how's that in my account?
But a lot of that's USC. USC is a bigger school now.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's similar, but not the same. And like, if we had the same scale, I think that Miami
would be about the same budget, probably.
I think it would even exceed USC's at the same actual, like, size number. But yeah, just bringing that in, it just shows the foundation of everything that like we bring to the table as a university, as we look forward. And I do expect, Miami to be leaving the ACC. It's not just going to be Florida State and Clemson. Our athletic director came from Clemson. He was the first one to do a presentation about needing to leave, this conference when he came to Miami. And I think that we're cool being, like the silent leader in the background and saying, hey, Florida State and Clemson, y'all want to be the loud, talky guys. Y'all go do that. We'll just follow in, and then we'll find our own path.
Well, and the other thing too is, as a private school, you get to do whatever you want.
Pretty much.
Which gives you a lot more flexibility. You don't have to, have public meetings to approve things. You can do what you want. And that is very, for schools like Miami, for USC, for the Ivy League schools, Northwestern, the being private is a tremendous, it's a disadvantage in that you don't get, $400 million from the government every year. But it's a huge advantage in that you're not accountable to anybody either. And as we saw here, a lot of these schools, I thought this was interesting. A lot of these schools don't get as much money from the government as you would think. So Clemson, for example, Clemson only gets $169 million from the government.
Really?
Yeah, no, this is appropriation. So like, the government gives you research grants and everything. So the difference between public schools and private schools pretty much is whether you get the appropriation or not. And so this is somehow Miami gets appropriated 17 million. I'm guessing it's, I don't know, pediatric health or who even knows? I'm just making that up. It's something small that's there, but you sort of see here, Carolina's getting 600 million, Florida's getting almost $1 billion, Texas A&M, UCLA getting a ton. But you see a lot of these folks don't. I mean, Michigan only gets 3% of their budget from the state.
Wow.
So Michigan's effectively a private school.
I definitely thought that was going to be higher. Again, as a native Michigander, and I have, half of my graduating class from Cranbrook went there. My uncle, and
exactly.
Like I had a different impression, especially because it's the University of Michigan, and like Ann Arbor does not exist without the University of Michigan. Like it is a college town to that size and scale, like one of the top 5 public institutions in the country. But to see this financial foundation, this is very eye-opening, definitely.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting because again, it shows that how much governments, because again, when you have the more sources you have pumping money into the school, the more flexibility the school has to then decide what they want to spend their extras on versus the folks scraping by. I mean, what really worries me are like the future for like the MAC teams, for example, where they're already like currently football does not even pay for itself in the MAC and in the Sun Belt and a lot of other places. So you start to wonder as we go towards revenue share and all sorts of other stuff, how will that go? And then tuition revenue. This is another great statistic for Miami. Only 14% of Miami's money comes from tuition.
Interesting.
So again, they're not really dependent. As the we have the rapid demographic cliff coming up. First of all, they'll probably be fine because they're Miami and they can still pull students anyway, but they're not dependent on tuition for their money.
I believe, well, especially with the University of Miami health system, which is like
Huge.
probably the major health provider in South Florida. Or, yeah, I would say it's the number one of a couple. There's Memorial, there's Baptist Health, but I would say, but even Baptist Health is partnered with UM. So yeah, like that's huge. I mean, it is crazy because, I mean, now, not to say, to misrepresent people, like total cost of attendance per year is up over $80,000-$90,000 for the University of Miami. So this is not saying that it is cheap for an individual student to go, but that we get a lot of the budget from other places. But
well,
I mean,
one of the things we also looked at was growth. And I thought that was really interesting. So this is enrollment growth. It's undergrads horizontally and grad students vertically. And I mean, and this is over a period where the number of students shrank. The number of students is going down overall, but these schools are mostly all going up. So it's like, it really is. And I put a thing on Twitter the other day about sort of the rich getting richer, but about the consolidation of, we look at spending, we think about, the FBS schools are, just sort of being evil in, they're taking all the money. But they do the same thing overall. If you look at if you look at like sports spending of, FBS versus the rest of Division I versus Division II, Division III, NAI, they're only a small portion of the number of schools, but they're a massive portion of the athletic spending.
Yeah.
But that huge percentage is the same when you look at things like research spending and you look at overall spending and you start to look at all these other metrics of them as schools.
Yeah.
And it really is. In fact, if you take out the weird little cluster that's like the Ivy League, because they're doing they already played this game. They just did it 100 years ago. It's really, really interesting to sort of see that, it's these same schools that are sort of gobbling up all the football money are also gobbling up all the money everywhere else too. And all the students.
Oh, interesting. And just like from a Miami standpoint, thinking of new programming that has been unveiled recently within the last decade, and then just facilities upgrades. There's a lot of new dorms, so there's a lot of more, availability on campus, so that the undergraduate population can grow from the 8,500 that it was when I was a student in the early 2000s. So like my dorm has now been torn down and replaced with a new, bigger, better dorm. So that same footprint now holds, I think, like 1.8 times the number of students. So, like an extra good amount just in that one dorm area. And then obviously not around in the Miami area. So I could see that. And then, yeah, just as I've continued my professional journey, I've seen additional professional and graduate level options as well. So we're saying, okay, so this makes sense to see probably 22% growth undergrad right and like 30 something. Yeah, like that's I
don't have the growth on there. This is just enrollment overall. They're up to 13K undergrads now and 7,000 grads.
That's crazy. That's, again, when I was an undergrad,
way bigger.
It was 8,500, and I think that we were like 13,000 total in like around 2001 when I was there. So I mean, you're talking about going from 13,000 to 20,000 in the space of 20 years. Like, I mean, I know when rolling over time and looking at the infrastructure needed, that's pretty huge. So
that's huge growth. Yeah, no, they're really doing stuff. Again, it's that same thing we see, everywhere else. These schools that are the FBS schools that you guys cheer for are doing the same thing in every other aspect of their schools that they're doing in sports.
Wow. But also, just to talk, to kind of bring it broad, look at the proportion between Miami and Florida State, or Miami and Texas A&M. So when, people are saying, okay, like it's and like I've seen a couple comments in the chat, Falcon and TRX, obviously appreciate you hopping in there. Like, Miami is a known national brand. I mean, if you look at Miami compared to Notre Dame, a even smaller private school, right? But definitely, known nationally and internationally. It's just, you're going to have a higher volume of people from these. I mean, Florida is not highlighted, but I mean, they're third on this list. So I mean, look at the comparison between, $55K per year and then $19K per year, and then just like take fandom and then extrapolate that out with even like students who attend and then just people who are fans thereof and did not attend. Like it's definitely a numbers game. But and I'm fine being in the minority because like I love being a Miami Hurricane, but just putting it out there and like laying bare, hey, yeah, these numbers are disparate.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Wow. Okay.
Where was your we had somewhere here. Where was the? This was This is the yield rate versus admit rate.
Okay.
Admit rate is the the number of students that apply that are accepted, and yield rate is the percentage of students who are accepted that actually attend. And you see Miami and Florida State both great on this chart.
Yeah, Florida. I mean, they're up there. More people go there, but I mean, hey, whatever. Fine. Interesting.
But they're cheaper.
It is, and the admissions rate has gone down since I was in high school. I mean, I still probably would have gotten in because like I'm smart, I'm a nerd, but like it's interesting to see that like because Tad Foote, who finished his tenure as president in 2000. 2001 at the end of that year and transitioned to Donna Shalala, like his path, and then he passed the baton to her, was trying to make Miami the Harvard of the South. That was his stated goal. So improving academics, getting rid of that suntan U moniker from, when everybody knows it. I mean, look, you have an Olympic-sized pool in the middle of campus with a gigantic patio right there. Yeah, we're going to go between class, or like when we don't have class, and like lay out and like catch some rays, or like myself included, and just kind of go over
Miami.
there. It's Miami, but like the top administration had tried intentionally for now going on, 30 years to turn that tide and like improve so many different metrics of the university, including raising the academic standards to lower the acceptance rate from what I think it was like 41% when I applied down to, around 20. So cutting it in half, but being intentional about how you got there.
Well, and here's the rank. So we got Miami. They're at 67 now in U.S. News. Really pretty solid in ARWU. Business school, they're pretty good. Law school, they're a little further down. Med school is really good too.
Yeah, I just remember being top 50. I know when in U.S. News and World Report when I was an undergrad. But yeah, seeing
they changed the metrics this year, so they were getting a lot of flack at U.S. News because people thought that they were rewarding the wrong things. That they were like rewarding schools who essentially like churn out debt-laden students who have problems, and so they changed some of the factors a little bit and. There was a reshuffling, and like I know Baylor and BYU were both really angry about how they fell. USC fell a few. A number of schools fell. TCU fell. Again, great schools, but it had something to do with, again, I think like I don't know, debt per student. I don't remember which metrics they changed, but it was a few of those. Again, it was sort of people saying U.S. News, you're rewarding the problems within higher ed, and so they try to take that out a little bit.
Got it. Yeah,
but I'm sure they'll rapidly, tweak what they need for new metrics and be back there.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, but like to your point, law school being up there, med school, again having pretty much the foothold in South Florida for medicine and everything. I know several people who have gone to the med school, so seeing those things, and those are all positives in terms of offerings of the university, and then particularly in the medicine field, or just with the connection to the network, fiscally. And I know that people were talking about that, even when we were going to hire Mario Cristobal and things like that. But I mean, it is run under the university, and there is a portion of those, of that revenue that is able to be used as we see fit, including for programming, which includes athletics, which is programming.
Well, that's the huge thing. Like we were talking earlier before you got on about how, the more of these big revenue streams that universities have coming in gives them the flexibility to do what they want and to say, we want to still compete. The world's going to change. We got to pay people. Okay, we'll do it. We're in. And there's other schools that are going to struggle with that. That's you look at back to the budgets. Again, there's money there for a lot of those schools who want it. Where's your national leaders? Do you have anybody? Oh, you have 4. This is Congress and Supreme Court cabinet officials.
Yeah,
you guys have four congressmen probably.
We do have those people.
Where was the budget? And then this was research spending. You guys just joined the AAU. They're doing all kinds of really great stuff there.
Single primary campus only. Okay, I was going to say because in terms of the non-medical research, that number is a little skewed because Miami is one of the leading schools in marine and atmospheric science with the Rosenstiel School of Marine.
No, that would count in here.
So that would count in the single.
That would count in here. Yeah.
Really? Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Where that doesn't count is the schools that are a little screwy. Like Tennessee's med school is in Nashville.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. Maybe it's Nashville or Memphis. I forget which. It's in one of the others. And so, like, whether or not that counts as part of Tennessee is sometimes dubious.
Got it.
Texas has like 5 med schools. How many of them should count? Like, there's a lot of there's some debate in some of these that get messy. So that's the single. The private schools typically just report one number.
Okay. Yeah, I would just still think.
But that's no different than Cornell's in Ithaca and their med schools in New York City, and they report that as one.
Got you. Fair. Okay.
So why should Nebraska? And some of you guys know Nebraska got kicked out of the AAU over that primarily. Like it was a whole dumb thing. So like why do Cornell and Penn State get to do it and Nebraska and Tennessee don't? I don't know. So the left puts them together and the right keeps them separate.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
I won't bore you with the whole debate about assigning a research by campus, but
I can tell that you have a lot to say on the topic.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate there that nobody on this channel wants to have, so we won't have it.
No worries, no worries.
But again, this is just another one of those ways that money goes into the schools.
Got it. Okay. Nice. Well, I've learned a lot for sure. So yeah, thank you.
Although, hold on, there's one thing we have to ask you about. We have to put you on the hot seat.
Oh boy.
There's no way they sold 77% of their tickets last year.
Sold? Yes, absolutely. Sold.
Did they?
Sold as in when you include corporate blocks and things like that. There was, transactions.
I'll give you a whole section for $10.
Pretty much kind of a thing. But in terms of
I'm just kidding.
Actual attendance, again, these are reported attendance, which
tickets sold.
Tickets sold, but actual butts in seats
is lower.
No, it was nowhere near 77%, especially after that Georgia Tech loss. That was but I would say
I don't feel bad. The one underneath you, I manually corrected because they lied to the NCAA and put the Rose Bowl capacity at 54,000.
I was about to say UCLA 52. What? But yeah, the Rose Bowl's 194.
It's 92.
I was going to say 94, 92. Okay, yeah. So
I fixed it though. I put this chart together. I looked. It said UCLA has what? And I looked. I was like, oh no. And I went into the database and manually typed it. I was like, I know we are not pretending the Rose Bowl is 54,000 seats.
Well, because they block off part of the end zone area or something for you. So yeah, so they're like, technically the seats exist, but we've tarped over them, and then no, it's still
no, UCLA, you're not getting away with that.
Right? No,
92.
No, that's perfectly fair. But yeah, I do think that especially seeing all these deals and knowing the corporate sponsors and seeing all these things there, that go on at the stadium and whatnot. So many partners from the Miami Dolphins, F1 is there. The Miami Open is no longer on Key Biscayne; it's on that site. So you're talking your Bacardis, your Budweisers, your all those sponsors and partners and things. I could
all get tickets.
Yeah, they all get tickets. They all buy stuff, whether they give them to people or whatever. But yeah, in terms of what the actual attendance in the stadium was, I would say of this number, you could lower it by half. It would probably be in that UCLA range, that 48 to 55% actual attendance. And yeah, for many years, people have derided Miami for being a digital fan base and only existing online. But Miami is an event town, man. If you don't have something that's really high caliber and high quality, there's so many other things to do in South Florida, you know? Like, come on. Like, it's like,
I mean, it's the same in LA. It's the same issue.
That's what I was gonna say. Like,
same issue in San Francisco.
Would you rather go spend a day over by Fisherman's Wharf, maybe go take a tour of the bay, drive over the Golden Gate, look at Alcatraz, right? If you're in Miami, and everybody, I mean, I know they always send a camera crew down to South Beach to get the video, but we know that Miami Gardens, not by South Beach, guys.
No, it's not.
Not even a little bit, guys. But you could be on South Beach. You could come to downtown Fort Lauderdale where I live. You could go to, any other number of beaches. You can go to Coral Gables proper. Like, there's plenty of places and plenty of things to do. If you look up events in Miami tonight, well, it's raining like, a biblical plague or something now, so probably not tonight, but if you looked up things to do in Miami on any given weekend, there's so much to do on any given random day. So if you're going to take your time out to leave your location, wherever that is, and drive to Miami Gardens or, Carroll City, and go to that stadium and be there for as long as it takes with travel, as long as it takes to park, as long for the game, and then if you're going to make a day, because you pretty much have to dedicate a full day to doing a game, right? So that means that you're also dedicating a day to going and doing that at the exclusion of these other things you could possibly be doing, including staying in your overpriced but probably beautiful home, wherever that happens to be. Like, it is a challenge, but Miami, the fans and the community does come out when there are events that warrant and necessitate it. Whatever it is, hopefully, there more of these items will be Miami Hurricanes football games. But yeah, the attendance has definitely struggled as the performance is matched.
But the thing, and I could be wrong in this, I guess we'll find out, but I think as they get hot again, the attendance will come back.
Absolutely.
Because it's the place, when it's the place to be, people will go.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, you saw, everybody in the world pulled up for the F1 race. Like, it's always packed for, if you have a good product, you'll be there. I've talked about it often, but think back to 2017, Saturday night, 8 p.m. game day game for Virginia Tech. You beat them, then you run it back the next week for Notre Dame. Again, if you look and think, when have they put that 8 p.m. primetime ABC #1 national game in the same place for consecutive weeks? Few times, if any, but one of those times was Miami, because Miami is good and draws eyes.
Yeah, and draws eyes on TV. I mean, when we were looking at TV numbers, you guys in Florida State were both, before here, not very good in this time. Mm-hmm. This is average game viewership. So this is 2016 to 23. You were bad and Clemson was exceptional in this period of time. Exceptional. Yeah. Your average viewership is on network is pretty much the same as Clemson.
Come on. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's, again, you literally just said it. We were mediocre at best and they were exceptional, and the numbers are virtually the same. Like, again, national brand, international brand, people know the U. And it's just, it's one of those things. Now, I get the ESPN number being a little bit lower, especially because, like, Thursday night games do skew that.
They all sort of skew that, yeah.
Right. And
overall, people don't watch. ESPN generally again, aside from like those rare games and the LSU Saturday night, Tennessee, whatever, the ESPN draws much. I mean, people think that that TV numbers are driven by fans. Mark and I have talked about this before. They're not. They're driven by, like, your aunt who lost the remote last week and she's just watching CBS. There's 20 of her for every person who knows that Boise State plays on blue turf.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, these numbers get influenced by, and people, they watch Miami. I mean, I'll tell you, a school that draws better TV than their, attendance numbers, whatever, suggests is Stanford. People will watch, Stanford games more so than they'll watch them in the stands. So you have some schools like that, but if it is a big name and people watch.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know that about Stanford, but
I mean, it's not they're not a huge draw, but it's better than you would expect given given the quality of the team and the attendance when you take a look at that kind of stuff. But
Yeah,
again, you look at this. This is so telling to me because you look at you from 2016 to 23 versus Clemson from 2016 to 23, and you're pretty close.
I mean, and like again, maybe that was buoyed a little bit by 3 games in 17. So Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, and then the day that it all died in Pittsburgh, the day after Thanksgiving. Those 3.
But people watch, like Miami, Florida State. It doesn't matter how bad you guys are. People, the nation will watch. Now that may not last forever. If you both stink for 50 years, that might change. But a couple of years ups and downs, the nation watches.
No, very true. And I mean, seeing laid bare right there. So, yeah, again, it is incumbent upon Miami to be successful on the field to like continue to get great placement, and then this will only continue to go up. And you're talking about your Aunt Sally in Mississauga, Montana, or whatever. But a point that I've made with Mark on the channel several times is like just remember that like when you're focusing as fans, you kind of miss the forest through the trees, and everything. Like football games are not football games; they're television shows, and like it's hard when you're like, no, but I'm a fan and I go, and then it's like, yeah, cool, and great for you, and I love all of that. But I started with bowl games or television shows, but like really all of them, all games are television shows. Like that is the thing, and it's and when you look at it from that standpoint, especially when you have your big 4 networks on the left and all those kind of things, like you can say, oh yeah, no, this is an episode of Friends, this is an episode of whatever, put that in there. That's how these companies view football games, not for the sports content, but as a intellectual television programming property. And
you really see it. I guess postseason is a bad, really not really relevant number.
Well, I mean, we've only been once, so no, we've been, but just to random bowl games, but still.
Conference championships doesn't really apply. You guys haven't been in a conference very long.
Long enough that the number should be greater than 0 for us, but whatever.
No, conference championships. It says you have 9.
Going back to the,
I wonder if some of those are old.
Yeah, those are Big East championships, and Miami was independent for a long time, also. So
they're probably Big East. That's what it is.
Yeah, but the history of being in a conference to win conference championships is also pretty short.
You haven't been in a conference for 50 years.
No.
So, yeah. But your all-time winning percentage, particularly given that is very heavily weighted in the post-1980 era, is pretty high. I mean, it's higher than Clemson.
Yeah. And I mean, like they were going to kill Miami football before Howard Schnellenberger, people have talked people from Miami have talked a long time. Like you go to Burger King and get a Whopper and get, 2 free tickets to the Orange Bowl, like literally for a point, because nobody was going. But yeah, it's interesting to see the development and just all this, these foundations.
And obviously 5 golden. I have a T-shirt that says 5 golden rings. Nice. Although funny enough, I got it in like middle. I don't think I still have it anymore, but I got it in middle school, and I tried to find it because it was actually a bootleg shirt that we got down on campus there. They were selling for like $5 after they didn't win in '92. And so I wanted to save it until it became like real again, but I think my mother threw it away at some point. It did become real later on.
Darn those purges and everything, right?
I know, they got their 5th one.
We did. I'll leave that there.
Yeah.
Cam's going to stop right there at 5, at least for tonight.
Nothing else. Anyways, so yeah, 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Good times. But yeah.
No, it's again. This is why people talk about Miami and they think a lot of times we sort of get myopic. We only think about like the past 5 minutes, but I mean Miami's a draw. Florida State's a draw.
Absolutely.
Carolina's a basketball draw.
Carolina is arguably the basketball draw. Like,
oh yeah, you want to see something wild? Look at
Yowzers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody else is just nothing.
Pretty much. That's craziness. Yeah. Hey, Carolina brand, Carolina basketball. Grew up watching them all the time on ACC Wednesdays. So, yeah, very familiar with their game. And they beat the Fab Five too. God darn that time.
I remember
Anyways,
that.
but yeah, no, like I said, they're arguably the draw. Now, obviously, I think that, they're not included in this because, like, why would they be included in like a multi-sport conversation? But Duke also being like up there as one of the major draws for basketball as well.
Yeah, I mean, somebody told me, or I think put on Twitter today, or something like, guy I know said, it's based on some Nielsen calculation. I'm not sure exactly which calculation, but they said essentially Carolina basketball and Duke basketball together, by again whatever calculation this was, has more media value than Clemson football, according to this whatever Nielsen calculation that was. I don't know what it was. I mean, but I could see it.
Yeah,
because people forget that, like, for basketball, it matters a lot at the elite top tip, but then the difference for most of us is insignificant.
Right, but then when you're taking two of the top four kind of program and value, market share, all those things, and putting them together, yeah, I could see that combination eclipsing Clemson for sure.
Don't come for me, Clemson fans. I didn't do that math. I'm just kidding.
Well, they're good Southern people, so they're not going to come for you.
I love my Clemson friends. My Clemson friends are all awesome.
Yeah, I got a couple as well, so they are all awesome. But no, this has been fun, man. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm gonna step off of here, but yeah, great conversation, some really great data there, and I learned a lot, and hopefully share some stuff with you guys as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Go Canes!
Hey, that's right, go Canes!
Thanks, Cam.
Yeah,
have a good vacay.
I definitely will. See you soon.
Cam Underwood, State of the U. And just to clarify, because there was a comment made in the chat, we invited media members from Miami, Florida State, North Carolina, and Clemson. So just make sure that we are not prioritizing any particular. You should know me, for some people that have watched for a consistent period of time.
Mark loves them all.
Cover all the bases. So if somebody didn't show up, it was their choice not to show up. We want to have everyone represented. It is never my goal to skew the conversation in any such way.
Sorry, guys. If you're Clemson fans or Florida State fans or Carolina fans, we all love you too, equally.
I actually invited more Florida State and Clemson people than I did Miami. Miami was just Cam. Invited 3 Florida State people, 3 Clemson folks as well. A few things here, Tony.
Yeah.
And most of these, ironically, I had more academic questions than athletic questions. Maybe that's because I've got my head stuck in football every day, all the time.
Well, you know the answers on football.
So with the academics have just interested me, a number of these things. So you made a statement about Florida State really focusing and putting its energy and resources toward improving academically. And
in the last 35 years or so. Yeah, dramatically so.
So when a school does that, what type, besides fundraising and just throwing money at issues, what are they doing to improve academically?
Well, so they've really tried to grow. So again, Florida State was, I don't know, it wasn't a normal school. It was like a school for like teachers, all women until like the end of World War II. So what they've done is really ramped up their standards. They've hired better faculty. They've blown up like the national research that they do. So their research spending has gone from, not very much to 400 million or something. Created new programs. The growth of the state of Florida has really fueled those schools' ability to become elite schools. I mean, the University of Florida a lot of people don't realize, is a phenomenal school. Florida is, up there, with Michigan, in North Carolina, as far as great schools. So the ability to do that is part of it's fueled on, growth of money, and part of it's fueled on the growth of the state. the state has more money to give them, and the state has more population, so they actually can be more choosy about who they take. I mean, one of the things, for example, when you think about schools like West Virginia and New Mexico and Wyoming, there are no 3 like sports schools that are more important to their states than West Virginia, New Mexico, and Wyoming, as far as what they do for the state. But part of their mission is to educate the people of the state. So, you know, their admissions rate is really high because that's their job. Like, their job is to do that. When you have a big state and the state gets rich and there's a ton of people and all that, it allows you to really fund like elite schools and then, you know, build a whole bunch more schools for everybody else. That's the model that California started in the 1950s when they did the whole California higher master plan in 1960, and you've gone for it since then. So that's why you see, you know, UCLA, and Cal's actually tied with UCLA. You know, they're the #1 public schools in the country. You take a look here, Florida, you know, they are right there between USC and Texas. You know, Texas, the same thing. So, you know, being the flagship schools of a big state gives you that ability to do that because you don't have to have as much at the bottom end. But they, again, also, you know, what they've done to really invest in their faculty, in research and student experience, all that. These people don't appreciate. These schools don't just want to be good in football. They want to be they want to be great in everything that they do, whether that's football, whether that's engineering, whether that's science, whether that's music. They want to be great in everything they do. And so, like I said, when you look at how money's been consolidating, it's not just football and sports where they're consolidating the money. They're doing it everywhere else too.
I'm just in the process of responding to somebody. There we go. So I did a series where I looked at realignment, which I've done a number of those, of course, but I was comparing academic standings this off season as you have them ranked right there from the U.S. News and World Report.
Yep.
Versus looking at the videos just to make sure I wasn't missing things and hitting the same metrics from 3 years ago. And I was quite surprised at the amount of movement. North Carolina, I think, rose from 28 to 22. For Florida State, I think they pretty much stayed the same. They may have increased their position a little bit. Clemson dropped from 78 to 86, and Miami had a fairly significant drop as well.
So a lot of that is the score. I don't know if it was 23 or 24. I forget exactly when they did it. U.S. News changed their scoring a little bit. Again, they were really under a lot of pressure, sort of from the world, really, because people were telling them that their rankings, which matter a lot to people, and you don't have to like their rankings, you cannot like, but like they matter a lot. But people were telling them that their rankings were rewarding the things that are wrong with higher education. You know, they were rewarding schools for, you know, turning kids away, not for who they bring in. They were rewarding them based on whether the school was rich, regardless of what they did with the students. They were rewarding schools who were churning out, you know, students who couldn't get jobs but had way too much debt. You know, things like that. And student debt was a big issue. And so they refigured the scoring. And again, you saw the private schools all kind of take a hit. Baylor took a big tumble. TCU took a big tumble. And USC took a small tumble. They went down like 5. You know, but 5 matters a lot when you're going from 23 to 28. You know, 5 doesn't matter as much when you're going from, you know, 105 to 110. So you really saw that change, I think, probably shifted them a bunch. And it's not necessarily a bad change, right? Because again, it's they were telling schools, we're going to reward the people who don't do the things that are wrong with higher ed. A lot of like the Patriot League schools got creamed.
Another question concerning game day revenue, and you said that was a little bit quirky in regards to how that gets tracked and accounted for, and who benefits from that.
Yeah, athletic department doesn't get very much of it in most cases.
Because when you think about, let's just take Clemson on a game day, 80,000 people in that stadium. Maybe the average tickets, maybe I'm stretching it, $100 for a big game.
Well, what do students pay? Remember, this is all games and includes all tickets.
Sure. I'm just trying to grind it down to how much money is brought in one Saturday afternoon. That's $8 million just at the gate, plus food and merchandise and parking, and they've got to be bringing in.
Well, and I don't know. They may have a thing. So
And
one of the places. This is why I put them both there. Notice how their donor giving is really high. So they may have an accounting quirk. That's part of why I put these together, because these are often have a relationship. In some cases, there's, depending on how you do it, there's an accounting quirk where money looks in the accounting like it's coming in as donor giving. Another example of that, which I talked to the AD from there. Actually, I put out a thing on just on ticket revenue. Was talking to the AD from Troy, and actually, like, the dollars that come in from tickets don't touch Troy's books, because it runs through the athletic booster fund that then pays for something else. And I forget exactly how it goes, but it looks like Troy sells no tickets, which is true because Troy doesn't sell the tickets. The donor club or whatever does. So when you look at Clemson here, this is why, you see, they have a huge donor number and a small ticket number. And my guess is that there's a relationship. Like, some of the money that is really for attendance shows up in the books as donor. That is a guess. Somebody from Clemson, I could be wrong. That's what it tells me looking at that, or would be most likely.
Tony, is there a healthy ratio between graduate enrollment and undergrad in terms of a ratio?
No, it really depends on what your school wants to, like, what your school does. I mean, if your school has, if you have for example, if you have like a giant nursing school, and you have a giant, part-time business school, those numbers get big. So you look here, this is grad to undergrad. You see there's a pretty normal ratio here, but, a lot of times if you're in cities too, schools that are in cities they'll have, night law schools and part-time business programs and nursing programs. If you have a lot of med school too, there's a lot of like part-time nursing, stuff like that. It all really depends on the school. Or if you're just a school like Georgia Tech has a huge graduate engineering program. So, Georgia Tech has just an enormous amount of grad students. Nothing really screwy here. I didn't think for really any of these schools. USC's is really high as far as grad students. Again, a lot of healthcare, a lot of school of education, teachers, like LA City teachers who are getting a master's degree at USC. You see that a lot. In fact, I didn't put in. I was trying to take some of these charts out earlier today frantically because I was like, there's too many. But one of the ones I took out was about graduates, and USC was actually number one because they have so many people are there for like a 1-year grad program.
Let's make our way through these super chats. Falconer TRX, we thank you so much for the super sticker contribution there. Falconer TRX, public schools should not be allowed to use taxpayer money to pay for athletics.
Well, you know what a lot of them do? A lot of them say they don't. Like, this is the game that they play. By the way, guys, just so you know this, they say we don't use taxpayer money for athletics. We use taxpayer money for, we use taxpayer money to pay for the professors or, whatever. Well, then what they do is that then they take the tuition money and they use that for that. They say, oh, no, we don't use the tuition money either. Oh, we just use like all the money from the dorms and the parking, or whatever. So they play little games about like pretending sort of where it came from. But remember, at the end of the day, it's all coming into the school.
Falconer, we appreciate it. The U is known worldwide, #1 worldwide brand.
Good to you for that.
Falconer, private schools don't get my tax money either.
Oh, they do though. Oh, they do. Hold on, we're gonna make Falconer TRX really mad right here. Where was the budget? So they have to. Yeah, here we go. So one of the areas is, remember, the government is usually the state government doesn't give you the money, but the federal government does. Where was our research chart? Wherever that one was, I can't find it right. Yeah, so here is the state government giving you money, but remember, the federal government's got the real money. Take a look at these. Take a look at these numbers of what they get from the state, and then take a look at what the Ivy Leagues get from the federal government. It's a very different number. I don't know where it went. Sorry. I think it's further back, maybe wherever it was. But yeah, the federal government is a big chimer. Remember also, the federal government is the one fronting all the money for all of your students too. So you take a look at these schools, and I mean, there are schools like Grand Canyon and Liberty, something like 90%, I don't remember the exact number, but it's like of the dollars coming in, it's just a ridiculous percentage of numbers is from the federal government. Especially schools like Liberty, schools like Arizona State that have online programs, Purdue, Maryland. They have, tons of military people. I mean, they have like Maryland campuses, like on the Air Force bases all around the world. And so like just enormous amounts of federal money, even though it's not state appropriated money, enormous amounts of government money are going to those schools.
Falconer TRX, why do Kane's tax dollars go to Florida State and the University of Florida?
The sad part about being private. Oh, there was the research chart. There it was. Yeah, you look at this. I mean, Texas, I forget what the number we just saw. Texas getting what, 400 million or something from the state. I forget what it was. If you count the med schools, Texas is pulling in 3.2 billion from the federal government mostly. Not all from the federal government, but a lot of it is. But they're also, curing cancer. So there's that. It's going to good causes.
Absolutely. Falconer TRX nominating Cam as next president of the U.
Job's open.
Hopefully Cam saw that. Falconer TRX 2017 Notre Dame game was epic. Yes, as Cam was running down 2017, the last time Miami really made a run for a playoff spot, and they had successive Saturday nights in which, the place was rocking for sure. And yes, Falconer TRX looking back at the 2003 Fiesta Bowl, wanting his 6th ring. I gotcha.
Throwing a flag. No, just kidding.
Throwing a flag on that one.
Throwing a flag on that one.
All right, Tony. The last one I've got for you tonight is more putting everything that you know about the SEC and the Big Ten and Clemson. I'm going to pinpoint in particular, because if we were having this conversation, let's say 10 years ago, I would have said Florida State would be my guess as being ticketed to the SEC. They're an SEC school in regards to geography, rivalries established with the SEC and so forth. But I'm very much thinking that with a lot of things that have been put in play and with what the school itself wants, it appears as though they want to be in the Big Ten. Clemson, to me, feels and looks and has all the markings of an SEC school. If they are leaving the ACC, would you see Clemson as more of a fit in the SEC?
First of all, I do think they fit better there. They're more like an SEC school than a Big Ten school, but the Big Ten is adopting sort of a national perspective. So it would make sense that they would want to have a team in the Southeast. I think I can't speak for the actual school executives. I know what some of them have privately told me, but my impression overall is that if the ACC wanted to fight itself out in court for a few years, there would be no objections from the SEC, is my guess. I don't think they, there's people that really think the Big Ten wants more. There's people who don't think the Big Ten wants more. And there's people who think that the Big Ten and the SEC would both do what had to be done. Looking at long-term stuff, would both do what they needed to do for the long term if there were things available, but would not necessarily regret not having to make another huge change right away. I really believe that's true at the SEC. I could be totally wrong. That is not, that is not directly from a school official, but just my impression is that they would just love it if things worked out for a little more stability. I think they're really happy kind of where they are. I mean, if you look really at the right now, the value adding perspective, there's not a lot of teams that add. Notre Dame adds value. I think Florida State adds value. Carolina football doesn't. Again, if you want to talk about, well, if we factor in carriage rates and we add the basketball thing and this other factor, and could you get Carolina up to nose close to the line? Maybe. And could you get, the bigger question is, if the ACC were to be as dumb as the Pac-12 and fall apart, if it's fallen apart, do you pick up some pieces? Yeah, probably you're more likely to do that because it's the only time you're ever going to necessarily maybe be able to pick up that piece. So sometimes you make decisions that you would make in times of crisis that you would rather not do. It's like I've known people that their neighbor was moving and they wanted the land, and so the neighbor moved and they bought the house because if you didn't buy it now, you might not buy it for another 50 years. So it's like some things like that you have to make when the time is right. I don't think the SEC would object if they didn't have to expand. But I think they would probably do so if they needed to.
Yeah, so with Clemson and Florida State taking the moves against the ACC that there are going to be changes. If that wasn't going on, I would think that maybe there's a probability that we're at a landing spot right now for a while, partially because of what you just outlined, that these conferences are very comfortable with where they currently stand.
Well, and I mean, the thing about, I'll tell you guys, so I did some calculations on Carolina and Virginia. And it's really interesting to me because when you look at the football performance, when you look at TV rate, I looked at like 10 different metrics of football and TV. And they have a secret twin pair of another two schools that are also nearby rivals who are almost identical to Carolina and Virginia in all of those metrics, whether that is, again, football, whether that's TV, or even the academic stuff. They're very parallel. It's Stanford and Cal. And we saw the valuation on Stanford and Cal, or the de facto valuation on Stanford and Cal. And Virginia and Carolina have about the same TV numbers, about the same football success, about the same everything else as Stanford and Cal do over time. And so it's, you sort of start to say, okay, where is the $100 million a year in value for Virginia? Say, people, the rumor mill, when we know that it's not there for Cal because Virginia football is no better than Cal football.
Yep.
And again, whether you want to talk about can basketball make some up on the back end and the carriage rates of the state and your contract, maybe. Again, there are complications. This stuff is not easy. And there's also the sort of, one-time thing, do you do something when you have that one time you can do it? But, what's interesting to me, what I love about when we do these deep dives is we compare them just to this universe of the big schools. And, where we saw Carolina was not batting in that space.
Yeah. Now, I love Carolina. I would love to see a stabilized ACC, but it just doesn't seem as though that's going to happen because of the court battles going on right now. Just like I wanted to see the Pac-12 exist forever. I don't like seeing any of this. But if it's going to transpire, I'm going to be fascinated. Certainly, the landing spot for Florida State and Clemson are going to be crucial in terms of this power struggle between the SEC and the Big Ten. But I know that those schools have safe landing. They're too valuable. Miami, they may have to go Big 12, which to me is a very odd fit. But if that's what it is, that's what it is. I'll be curious, and I feel bad for the potential and most likely plight of Boston College, Syracuse, Wake Forest, and those schools. There's a layer in there, Tony, that I am curious to see. North Carolina State, Louisville, those kind of schools, and with as well as they play football and bring pretty good TV numbers, especially Louisville. Yeah. Whether they're going to be considered good commodities and where that's a dividing line that I think's interesting.
Well, because there really is a whole interesting. And the other thing too is with the house settlement thing. To these schools, we have to flick wherever back to their athletic department stuff. But to add to the athletic budget, you're talking about, can you add another 20? These are the elite schools here. But can you add another $22 million to this? If you're not in the Big Ten or the SEC, where you're getting, essentially the new playoff money and some other things is going to end up going to the players, effectively going forward. But these schools that were already down, and these schools aren't down, but the schools that are already down, I forget what it was. Houston and Central Florida both have like $90 million budget, of which like $40 million is subsidized. Now the Big 12 is going to pay them a little more, so that's good, but it's not going to cover that. It's not even going to cover their subsidy. If you think about, they're going to have to pay players now, and they're still looking at $30 million subsidies. Netting out the difference between the Big 12 and the paying the players. So I look at some of these schools, and it's like, how long do you have that you're willing to do that? Some of the Sunbelt schools are saddling, $2,000 and $3,000 per student into athletic subsidies. So, I wonder if there's a point where there's going to be a breaking point where the schools start to say, this is an issue. Interestingly, I was talking with a U.S. Senator's office the other day about, they reached out to me for some help with some math on some issues. And one of the issues they're concerned about is the impact on student debt of the house settlements and all the other growing spending in sports. How much of sports is turning into student debt is a question that they had to ask. And I know from some private discussions that issue has also been raised to much higher levels in the conferences as well. That's something that the government is very concerned about. Like, if you're going to be giving $20 million to your quarterback, that sure as heck better not show up as $20 million of new student debt that kids are being loaded on with.
Wow, absolutely. Tony, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate everyone who stopped by and contributed to the chat. Great conversation, both here and in the chat. Thank you so much. You can catch Tony. Let's bring up his X handle so everyone's aware. You can catch Tony at TJ Altimore, consultant strategist, and certainly he's come to our aid many, many times and
always glad to help.
We're going to continue these, folks. So we thought that obviously there's a connection here with everything that's going on in the ACC, and between these four schools in particular. We're going to look at Ohio State and Michigan together. We're going to do a bit of a rivalry series, Iowa, Nebraska, and a few other ones. Coming up Friday over on the national channel, Tony's going to take a look at the four incoming schools to the Big Ten: USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon, and how they match up against the upper crust of the Big Ten. That will be
fun.
Interesting. Yeah, that's going to be a good time. Tony, thank you so much for being
here.
I'm going to wrap things up here.
We'll see you soon.
Yes, we'll see you on Friday, Tony.
Right on. Go Bucks.
Great to have Tony here again to break things down for us. Again, you didn't even hear it tonight. Once he goes into the history books and starts to really break down some of the storylines and the narratives of what have brought some of these conferences together or split them up in the past. And I'm not talking about just recent history and some of the things that we know in regards to the Texas A&Ms and Missouri's leaving the Big 12 to go to the SEC. Sure, we're all up to date on that, but going way, way back into history and some of the fascinating stories and power struggles of these conferences has been a eye-opener and a education for me. Again, we're going to get together on Friday night over on the national channel to look at Washington, UCLA, USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, and what that looks like in regards to their histories, their traditions, their prestige, their media presence, and their football and athletic budgets and prowess on the field. We appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. ACC fans, I dropped a video on my ACC Power Rankings. It's over on the national channel. Please check it out. And we will see you soon right here at the Voice of College Football. You have a great night. And now we will present a word from our sponsor. Love what I do as a sports commentator. I have definitely been blessed. I enjoy my career. But I got to say, if I could turn back time, I would learn the business side of sports management, how to manage people, how to manage projects, how to manage situations. And then there's also those times in which you feel stuck in a job, stuck in a career, just feeling that there's a dead end and wondering and waiting, when is that break going to happen? Well, unfortunately, I got to tell you, that break is not coming unless you make it happen. Sports is your passion. You love it, you live it, you breathe it. Why not make your passion your career? Introducing Southern New Hampshire University, our sponsor. At SNHU, you will learn the business side of sports management principles, and how to gather and analyze data. This degree will help you prepare for a career as an athletic director, sports information director, marketing manager, and other exciting roles in the sports industry. You'll be able to tap into SNHU's network of graduates working in sports-related organizations. You'll also have the opportunity to take advantage of an internship or an experiential learning course within the field. Your courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience, so you'll have opportunities to connect with people in the industry. And when you graduate, SNHU will be right there to help you with your job search. SNHU is accredited, nonprofit, and has radically affordable tuition. SNHU was voted one of the country's most innovative universities by U.S. News and World Report. Just go to snhu.edu/VOCFB. The link's also in my description section down below to see if you qualify for SNHU's sports management program. You might be eligible for financial aid or have existing college credits that could fast-track your degree at SNHU. Click the link to get started. Your exciting sports management degree at SNHU awaits you. Do it now.